All right, guys, welcome back to the video. So in this one, we're gonna be making a knife, a really nice, simple knife that I am just super ecstatic to get back into trying to do again. So depending on how long you guys have been following me, I think it was back in like 2021, something like that, you know, a few years ago, I started trying to make knives, and I bought myself a little 1x30 grinder. I ordered some knife steel from a place out in BC, Canada, and I was super excited to try making some knives. And one of the things that I found very quickly that I did not enjoy about trying to make those knives was cutting out the initial shape. Everything else about making a knife, super fun. You know, grinding things down, doing all that was really fun. But in this case, when I decided I wanted to get back into making knives, I bought one tool that I was like, this is gonna be the game changer. This is gonna be what makes me wanna make more knives. And that was a very simple metal cutting bandsaw. I came across this bandsaw. It's a metal cutting bandsaw. It comes on this little dolly thing. It's kind of a brand that I have never heard of before. I don't even honestly know the brand off of the top of my head, but it is an amazing little tool. And for the price, it came with every feature that I could ever want in a metal cutting bandsaw, mainly the fact that it stood up on its own and had a little table that I could use to cut out the initial shape of my knives. And that was an absolute game changer. So I bought that bandsaw, I got it set up, and I was like, this is go time. I can start making knives again. Now the shape of this knife comes from a pretty generic pattern pack that I bought on Etsy. I bought the patterns for like $3, and it came with like 100 different SVGs of knife shapes. So we're starting with some 1084 steel, which is, as far as I understand, the best steel to work with at home. It's very easy to heat treat, it's very forgiving, it lets you get a very good edge, whereas a lot of other steels can be a little bit more difficult to heat treat. So that was the main reason I went with it. But mainly it's just the fact that it's also fairly inexpensive, which is a little bit nice when you're starting out, because I did not know from the get-go if this knife was going to work. So right off the bat, we're going in and we're grinding this thing to shape. I cut it very roughly the size on the bandsaw, and then I'm going over to my 1x30 grinder and just getting that initial shape in, you know, kind of ground in there. Then with that initial shape ground in there, I can go in with my really new fancy file guide. And what this tool does is it allows you to run a file and then keep your shoulders of your knife very accurate. So going between the left and the right side, you're gonna keep a nice horizontal line going through that's gonna match side to side. And these file guides, they have these tungsten carbide inserts that'll make it so that the file just skates over them and can't cut into the guide. So it does make sure that you do get nice, even lines. Also for our little sharpening choil here, that just allows you to sharpen all the way to the edge of the blade. You can file that in with a chainsaw file, but again, referencing that file against our file guide keeps everything in line with the knife, which I found is super important. And this is one of the things that drove me a little bit crazy on the previous knives I made, because things there just did not line up properly, and it really annoyed me. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and stuff like that does drive me a bit crazy. So from there, again, we're going back in and just shaping this thing as best I can. Now, I will admit that this is something that I do need a lot more practice with. My shoulders here are far from perfect. There's areas where I definitely slipped and went past the file guide somehow. Again, I just need more practice with this mainly. But overall, I'm fairly happy with this being kind of my first knife I've made in a very long time. Now with the shape of the knife ground out, we can then move on to grinding the bevel. Now I bought this jig for grinding bevels of knives back when I started, and I do like this jig. It does make it a little bit easier to keep a good accurate bevel grind on both sides. The only downside to it is that it's a little bit harder to tell if your bevel is even on both sides, because you can only do one side at a time. It's kind of difficult to then turn your knife over and get a nice even grind on the other side. So I did end up with my knife being a little bit off center, but again, overall that just is gonna come with a little bit more practice as well. But with a little bit of patience, I was able to get that bevel ground in fairly evenly. You know, I made some markings in the center line, and I was really trying to pay attention to what I was doing on both sides. I made sure to flip the knife around back and forth as much as I needed to get it as even as I possibly could, leaving a little bit of thickness on the bottom that I'd take off after it was hardened, because you want to make sure that your knife isn't going to warp. And then this thing was ready to go into hardening. So basically I have a little kiln that I make using some fire bricks and a MAP gas torch. I let the steel heat up to the point where it is no longer magnetic, you know, so I have a little magnetic thing that I can tap on it. And as soon as it is no longer magnetic, I wait another about 40 to 50 seconds to make sure that it is absolutely past that point of being non-magnetized. At that point, I can then go and dip it into some preheated canola oil. From there, it was off to a nice long heat treating process in the kitchen oven, which is always fun to do. And, you know, making sure that this thing kind of straightens out, and overall, again, worked out just fine. From there, we moved on to blackening the blade. So this is something, again, I've done a lot of research into how you actually can blacken knife steel, and there's all kinds of different ways to do it, and all of them with their different pros and cons. The only way I've tried in the past is using a cold bluing, but it's just, I wanted to try a different process, and that was rust blackening, I think is the terminology for it. So basically all you do is you take an oxidizing solution. So in this case, I'm using a mixture of vinegar, hydrogen peroxide, and table salt. And by mixing those together and then applying that to the steel, it makes the steel rust so quickly. And that's exactly what you want. Because then when you introduce that rust that is still clinging pretty good to the steel, when you introduce that rust to 100 degrees Celsius steam, or boiling water works just as well, that rust then turns into a black oxide layer that actually forms a hard coating on the surface of the steel. The other benefit that I found to it is that if you do it properly, anytime in the future, you know, let's say you forget to oil your blade or you leave it outside and it gets a bit more rusty, all you have to do is dip your blade in some boiling water, and that rust that then is built up on the blade will be converted to black oxide, which will then go back to helping protect your blade in the long term. Now, it is a bit of a time-consuming process, which is why, you know, a lot of the knife forums and that I was looking on don't recommend doing it. Something like Birchwood Casey gun bluing is pretty much an instant. You know, you brush it on, your blade turns black. It's super easy. But this steam blackening, you know, I had to do like 5 coats of that rusting solution to really get a good thick black oxide layer on there. But what is really cool about this is that this is a true black oxide coating on this knife. Now at this point, our blade is pretty much done. All we have left to do is to attach those scales. Now, I chose to go with just some raw, natural walnut. And again, this is something that I want to try doing better on future knives. Is all I did was just take some epoxy, some brass rod, and some natural walnut, and I just glued it all together. And while this walnut may expand and contract in its lifetime, it's never going to be that bad. And especially because it has been fused to this metal with that epoxy resin, it's probably never going to have a problem. So in all honesty, I think that there is not really any issue with putting natural wood on steel. The trick is it's just not a great practice. So ideally what I'd like to try and do in the future is use a stabilized wood, and that is a very simple process. You just need a vacuum press and some stabilizing epoxy resin, and I do have basically an unlimited supply of really nice knife scale material. So ideally in the future, I'll pick up some of that stuff and I can make my own knife scales and probably make some supplies for that on my website as well, which would be a great little side business. But that's kind of my goal going forward. But for now, I think the natural wood knife scales worked out just fine. And going back to things that I do need a little bit more practice on, definitely going in and grinding my knife scales to shape is something that I need to work on very seriously. These knife scales are the epitome of unevenness in just their general shape and form. You know, the left and the right side feel very different. But overall, what I did with this, or my main goal with it, was just to grind it until the knife felt comfortable in my hand, which it does. I really like the way that this thing feels. It's got a nice grip to it. You know, it's not like a fighting knife or anything. It's just meant for as a utility knife. And it feels good in the hand, which is what is really important when it comes down to it. The most important thing about a knife is that it feels good in the hand. You have good control over it. You have a good grip on it for when you're using it. You don't have to worry about slicing yourself. All around, it makes, when you have a good shaped handle, that is what really matters. Final stage of this is where I learned a very good lesson, and that is doing the sharpening on the final edge. So what I ended up doing when I was sharpening it is I found that I left my final edge before the sharpening stage way too thick. I ended up having to go back to the grinder to grind off excess material and taking it very, very slowly because this is a heat-treated blade, so I wanted to make sure I didn't damage that heat treating at all. So I had to grind off a bunch of extra material before I could then go back to the stones and try to get that final edge on it. And you can see in this clip where I'm trying to slice through some paper that this edge, it's not working great, but there's certain parts of the edge that seem to be holding a better, sharpness compared to other portions. And I think that just comes down to my edge thickness, which is again, something I'm gonna need to work on. And I think that the more time I can spend with this on some of those sharpening stones, the better edge that I'm gonna be able to put on this blade. If you guys have any thoughts or recommendations when it comes to making knives, make sure you leave them in the comments down below. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I do hope you are excited for me to get back into making a few knives here and there. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.